All right, welcome to Invest in You. Today we are two guys that will have a conversation about things that hopefully will interest you. So we'll talk about health, we'll talk about mindset, we'll talk about aging, and making the best out of it, and try to find new ways how to motivate and reward yourself in different ways. So I've got a guest today. His name is Mark Brcic, and he is an adventurer like myself. He is a connector like myself. He's a leader like myself. We're basically clones, but we are in different countries. So dialing from the US, and I am dialing from India today. So hi, how are you?
I'm wonderful. My brother from another mother.
Yeah,
Looking forward to
exactly.
this conversation. And one
Absolutely.
quick correction. I'm in Canada, not the US.
Ah,
Not
okay.
the US yet.
Okay, that's yeah, it's so funny. I mean, we had so many guests from the US, and many times when I meet people traveling, and they have almost like a T-shirt. I'm from Canada, but they're from the US. So for all American listeners, we are joking on your behalf. I hope that you can feel the love regardless. So let's jump in. So how did we end up on this podcast, and what's the mutual interest and theories? How do we end up on this podcast? Any ideas?
I suspect it's probably because we're both asking similar questions.
Yes.
We're asking similar questions of life.
Yes.
And we were chatting before we hit record about this idea of midlife.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
midlife as this in life there's some standard typical transition points. Obviously leaving schooling and heading into the world of the marketplace is one transition,
Yes.
childhood to, all that. But midlife is perhaps a broader transition phase. It's not quite
Yes.
as well defined, but for most people who've gone through this thing called midlife, it is often a very profound transition. And I think there are different ways to meet that.
Yes.
And maybe that's a good place to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. And we also got two younger co-hosts in their early 20s, both of them. And there are some things that they might not see as clear. So both of my sons are now taller than me and stronger than me. And of course, I'm competing with them, obviously. So they might not see the same thing here. So there are many things happening in the body as we age, everything from hormones to things changing. So we might have to train more and longer to get the same results. We maybe should not train as much as before, but parking that statement and jumping into the label of your t-shirt. So Wayfinders. So one reason why we are on this podcast is also I like that you take people on adventures and you allow people to explore, and also you've been arguably addressed as the number one mountain bike tour company on earth by National Geographic Adventure. So let's jump in a little bit to what do you usually do when you work with people without going too detailed.
Yeah. So for the first 20 plus years of my entrepreneurial career, I was running a company called Sacred Rides, which is a mountain bike adventure company. And we ran mountain bike trips all over the world. Um, Around 9 years ago, just as I was reaching the end of my tenure with that, I started hosting these events for entrepreneurs. My first event was actually a mountain bike event for entrepreneurs. So we were mountain biking. It was a group of 18 entrepreneurs. We would mountain bike, and then we'd come back to this beautiful cat skiing lodge in the afternoon, and we'd talk about business, and we would do some panels and discussions and stuff like that. So it's sort of like, picture an entrepreneur conference on mountain bikes.
Yes.
And and people loved it. They asked me to do a few more, so I did a few more. And at the time, I was, you run a business for 20 plus years. It doesn't matter how much you love that business at one point. Eventually, you might start to burn out a little bit. And
Yeah.
I realized I'd outgrown that company and it was ready to say goodbye. So I ended up selling that company a couple of years later so that I could focus on Wayfinders full time. And what I do is I take high achieving entrepreneurs and I take them to some of the wildest places on earth, places like Papua New Guinea or Mongolia or the depths of the Peruvian Amazon. And I create a context for them to explore what it means to move from high achievement to high alignment. So living a life that feels, very, very, that feels more true, that
Yes.
feels more like an expression of who you are at your core rather than constantly striving for the next, next milestone, the next goal, the next zero on your balance sheet,
Yes.
whatever. Because once you've been in the world of entrepreneurship for long enough and you've chased that goal and that dream long enough, you realize it's ultimately not getting you what you really want.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, sometimes there's a strong connection between the boardroom and adventure. So why could adventure be the best thing you do outside the boardroom to make you better in the boardroom?
Hmm. Well, there's a saying, if you're going to climb the ladder of success, make sure it's leaning on the right building.
Good point.
And I
Yeah,
know a
got
lot
it.
of people, yeah, I know a lot of people, myself included, who have climbed that ladder. I climbed it for many, many years, and then ultimately realized it wasn't necessarily that it was on the wrong building, but it was on a building I'd outgrown, and it was
Yeah.
time for a new building. And the author David Brooks, he has this wonderful book called The Second Mountain. So that first mountain is achievement, building your wealth, building your, status, all this kind of thing. And that's fine for a certain phase of life, but ultimately you realize that it's a little bit empty. There's not a lot of fulfillment in that. There's not a lot of inner resonance around
Yeah.
that, and that there's another mountain to be explored. And so, what I do is take people out of the boardroom, out of the office, out of their familiar environments, and I take them to a context and environment that is so radically different
Yes.
uh, from that. Not simply just because of the wild areas that we visit, but also because of the cultures that we encounter in those places. And it's very easy to get, very myopic when we're stuck in our world and we think, okay, this is the goal, and we buy into the story, that this is the goal, and then you realize when you get into these very different worlds that that our goal is just one story. It's one interpretation of what it means to live a human life, and that there's so many different interpretations. And so a Mongolian nomad's interpretation of what it means to live a meaningful life is very different, as is, a tribal villager in Papua New Guinea or a shaman in the Peruvian jungle. These are all different interpretations of the human life. And it's not that one is right or one is better than the other. It's just they're very different. And so when we're exposed to those, it's sort of a little bit like shaking the snow globe and saying, hey, am I climbing the right mountain? What about these other ways of being, right? And so to use, an example I like is I've taken two groups to Bhutan, this little tiny
Yeah.
Himalayan country, a few 100,000 people, very Buddhist,
Yes.
very strong monastic culture. There's hundreds of monasteries all over the country, and we've lived and studied and meditated and with the monks there. And when you spend time with the monks there, you realize they have a very, very different approach to life, and their life is very contemplative. There's a lot of stillness. Monks will often go into seclusion for 3 to 9 years, where they have no contact with the outside world. If
Yes.
somebody's bringing them food outside their door, but other than that, they're meditating, they're praying, and you would think, wow, that sounds like cruel, punishment, solitary confinement. But they're some of the most joyous, most happy, content, calm people I've ever met in my life. And the Dalai Lama is an example of
Yes.
somebody who's really conquered the monkey mind, so to speak. And then people go to these events, they don't come back home and think, oh, I'm going to become a monk, but they come away thinking, oh, maybe I don't have to be constantly doing and achieving and always in doing mode. There's something valuable from being in being mode, where it's
Yes.
okay that I have worth and value as a human being if I'm not constantly striving and creating. And so getting out of that boardroom and going to experiencing totally different ways of life, it gives us a wider palette with which to paint from.
Yeah, very, very good point. So, yesterday morning, I took two friends high up on the mountain through the tracks, route I haven't explored before. And then on the top is a Hindu temple from yeah, 300. Yeah, well, it's quite old. It's like
Yep.
the current temple is 800 years old, but it has been even longer time in the same location. It's very interesting to see what brings people from all over the world to a location like that. And in our case, it was just a short walk. For many people, it's a endeavor and travel all the world to get to a place like that for reflection and the view and many aspects. So you pretty much with your statement also touch upon the question, which is like, what is the hidden loneliness with high performance. So it's sometimes that it's lonely on the top. What 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 does that entail?
Yeah. Uh, I mean, it's certainly been my experience as an entrepreneur for 29 years now.
Yes.
It can be quite lonely and excuse me, quite isolating. And certainly I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs and
Yes.
I know hundreds of them. It is very isolating, often often because other people who aren't entrepreneurs don't quite understand the journey. They go in, they literally or metaphorically they punch a clock, and then they
Yep.
come home and they can leave work at home.
Yes.
As an entrepreneur, you're constantly your brain is constantly on. You're constantly worrying about work, whatever, and other people can't necessarily. And as a leader, when you show up for your team at work, you don't necessarily feel like that's a place where you can just be open and vulnerable about what you're going through because you feel
Yep.
like you have to show up as this leader who's got everything. And so it's hard to find people who understand what that journey is like, and then we tend to isolate. And I've had periods in my life, some very dark periods in my life, where I experienced so much shame around, just what I was feeling that I isolated myself even more from people, and then that made the darkness even darker. And it was this like terrible loop. And ever since, and that was, my journey in my early 30s, and ever since then, it's been this long, slow, steady climb out of isolation towards connection, and
Yes.
connecting with people who really get me, and I get them, and we resonate with each other, and we can be real and open and authentic with each other, and I don't have to show up some version of myself that isn't actually real. And loneliness, it's not necessarily a lack of other people in our lives. We can be in a room with hundreds of other people and
Yes.
feel very lonely. We can be in a marriage and feel very lonely. We can be in a city of millions of people and feel very lonely. It's, do we have people in our lives that understand us, that see the real us, we see the real them, we can show up with those versions of ourselves. And as entrepreneurs, we've learned to, present this polished version of ourselves to the world. But if we're presenting a polished version of ourselves, we are putting a barrier between ourselves and others in terms of real connection. So it's, we need to find places where we can just show up and be. And that's a lot of what I create during my events, is just creating
Yes.
a context and environment where people can show up because they're so used to going to different entrepreneur events where everybody is puffing out their chest, talking about how
Yes.
amazing they are, all their achievements, all the awards, all their revenue, and it's exhausting, right? And we just want to show up and be real and just say, hey, I don't have my act together. I'm kind of struggling in this one area, and somebody else can say, hey, me too, and we can meet in those places.
Yeah, and sometimes that's easier when you're taken out of context. So you're put together with a mastermind a group or a traveling group or something which is outside your normal organization. Often that can be your friend, it can be your spouse, it could be anyone. But to have that person to dial in with and to sync and to be able to talk is super valuable. And that's something that we might forget in our strive for performance, achievement, growth, all of those things that we might forget to listen to ourselves. Sometimes it's also possible to stop listening to the body signals, and that can be anything from like you're having too much or too little of something. We are often like a product of what we do in terms of habits, and the same with what we feed ourselves with. So it adds up. And now when you kind of like, for me, I see where I'm right now in my own life as like, this is fantastic. I see this is like, oh, round two, ding, ding, ding. I'm super energized about like what's next. And many people have different approach. They might slow down. They might have some health matters or whatever that is limiting what they can do physically. So why is it exciting with the midlife adjustment? And people that could be anywhere from like 30 to 60 and everything between. So it depends on you personally. So yeah, why can it be exciting?
Well, I would I would argue that these midlife transitions encompass a wide range of
Yes.
emotions, and it can certainly be exciting.
Yeah.
And I've seen it so much in some of my, I'm 55. I've
Yeah.
seen I've seen enough of my male friends go
Yes.
through a divorce
Yeah.
or
Same.
loss of a
Same. Yeah.
relationship. And I went through my own, excuse me, 2.5 years ago.
Yes.
And as we were talking about before, you can approach that, there's obviously more than one way, but just to simplify it, as a midlife crisis or a midlife chrysalis.
Yes.
And the typical crisis reaction is all this excitement, like, oh, now I'm free from this relationship that didn't serve me. I can get myself, the sports car I always wanted. I can get myself the young girlfriend I always wanted.
Yeah.
I can do, I can go on all this. And I see so many examples of that. And then I also see so many examples of that, of my fellow men who a few years later are still on that hamster wheel, and they're asking, why is this not really serving me? It was exciting,
Yes.
but now it's kind of lost its luster. Or we can approach it as this idea of chrysalis, right? And taken from the metaphor of the caterpillar and the butterfly. When a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, there's a chrysalis stage where the caterpillar essentially dissolves. It creates its cocoon, and then it dissolves. It turns into this goo, and for all intents and purposes, the caterpillar is dead. This old version is dead,
Yep.
and that's the building blocks. They call them imago cells that become the butterfly, become something new. And if we approach that midlife from that perspective of, there's some aspect of myself that has to die, that some aspect of my identity, ego construction,
Yep.
whatever, that needs to be left in the past, and I need to imagine. And that can often be really intense. It can be tough, difficult work. Letting our ego wants to hold on to that identity really strongly, and so letting go of that can be really tough. It can be disorienting. It can be very
Yes.
confusing. But if we're willing to stay in that, if we're willing to explore that and stay in that difficulty and ask these questions and explore, how did I get to this place? What are the patterns that have brought me here? And do the work, then what comes out the other end can truly be exciting, because it's really, really deeply aligned. It's not this very fleeting excitement of a motorcycle, or
Yep.
a new partner or whatever. It's this excitement of, oh, I finally get to understand who I am, and I get to live life from this new place of understanding deeply what I want. And the other part of it, I'm sure you've seen this. People, they get to a certain age and they're done pretending. They're if I can swear a little bit, they have zero fucks left to give,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's just like, I don't care what other people think of me. I'm tired of pretending and doing what I should. I
Yes.
want to do what feels right for me, right? And that's when we start asking those questions and doing that inner work to really understand who we are, and not worrying about what other people think. It's like, okay, yeah, I do. I want, I'm 55. I want to become a DJ, or I want to,
Yeah. Exactly.
whatever it is. I'm tired of people telling me, oh, you can't do that, or you shouldn't do that.
Let's do
This
it.
is this is this is springing from my soul. And
Yes.
I used to shy away from this word soul, because I thought, oh, it's got religious overtones, or people think it's too woo woo or whatever. But at my core, there's this thing that I call a soul, that is the truest version of me, beyond all these ideas of who I am and what I am and how I should be in the world. But
Yes.
something that's true. And if I can live from that place and express myself, it just feels so good, and it's like a magnet to others when I live from that place.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's common with peer groups and friends that have been through the same journey as well. So I'm completely with you, and also seen a lot of people go through exactly the same transformation as yourself as well. And I'm still in a relationship, and we're in the same relationship for a long time. I think one reason why we are still in this relationship is she's been traveling in the early days of this relationship, and I've been traveling throughout, here and there, everywhere. I'm traveling as we speak. So I think one reason why relationship has been working, has, I've been joking this before, is absence is one reason why it has been working. So not living on top of each other all the time, and also some kind of realization that we can't change each other after, I mean, too much. Ultimately, when you go into any relationship with a woman, they try to mold you into something that you might not be. You might be a bad boy, and they want to make you happier, or kinder, or it might be the other way around. So opposites attract in different ways. So yeah. So yeah, no, I can completely relate, because also work all over the world in many of these centers where many of the entrepreneurs come, for example, like Singapore, Dubai, London, New York, where you see a lot of people who are more focused on business than relationship, whether they are in a relationship or not, whether they're men or women, because ultimately, if you like to grow something substantially, then it takes a lot of your focus, which means again that I mean, this aspect of work-life balance, in my view, it's a matter of priority. I prioritize different things at different stages, different times. So let's play around with this work-life balance. What has been your interpretation in the last few decades between balance in life? Everything from health
Hmm.
to everything else.
Well, you touched an important word, which is priorities.
Yes,
And I think a key aspect of that is understanding your highest priorities and
good point.
living according to, being very clear on those and not what your priorities should be, but what your highest priorities actually are. And then
Yep.
also asking yourself where those priorities came from, right?
Yes.
And understanding the place they came from, whether they're grounded in, whether they come from a healthy, mature place. And so to give you an example, let's say your priority is financial abundance,
Yep.
um, which is wonderful. Nobody wants to live in poverty, or very few people do at least. But I have lots of people in my orbit that I see who are incredibly financially abundant and constantly striving for more and more and more.
Yep.
The
Yep.
company might be, $100 million company. They might have $10 million in the bank account.
Yes.
But then when you dig a little bit deeper, ask some questions, you find out that they grew up in extreme poverty, and that extreme poverty created this, this sense that the world is a very precarious, scary place,
Yep.
and so they become adults and they don't ever want to feel that again. They don't want to ever feel that fear, and so and they get $10 million in their bank account or 50 million or 100, and it's still not enough because the core, what's
Yes.
at the core is this feeling that's it's encoded into their nervous system. And so if you can't work with that at that level, then you're constantly going to be chasing this, and
Yes.
then to the exclusion of all other parties, relationships, health, whatever. So it's important to understand where your priorities are coming from, and do the inner work to understand yourself and make sure that they're coming from a healthy place. But then live life according to those, and not pretend that something that actually isn't your priority is a priority. Now, I want to you know, uh, include a word of caution there. If you have children, if you have a family,
Yep.
maybe if you're honest with yourself, it doesn't really feel like a priority. We should probably find a way to, make your kids a priority, unless you
Yes.
want to be a completely absent father or parent. But you know, saying that your health is a priority when it actually really isn't, your finances, your work, whatever else is a bigger
Yes.
priority, but then saying your health is a priority and then actually not living that way, well, just be honest with yourself, right?
Yes.
And so this idea of balance is just like really getting clear on the priorities and living as much accordingly with those priorities, and you feel less friction, right? Because the priorities are actually your own. They're not somebody else. They're not some influencer who told you you need to have a six pack, and so now your priority is I got to go to the gym 8 times a week and I have to eat,
Yep.
180.3 grams of protein per day or whatever.
Yep.
It's like that actually doesn't, if that doesn't actually resonate with you, you're just wasting your time. You're wasting other people's time.
Yeah.
So get clear on that, and then it doesn't feel like a balancing act. You just allocate, you allocate time to these different things. Obviously, there's always a trade-off, but you feel like you're putting enough into these things and you're wasting less time on things that are not a priority. Right? And so
Yes.
for me, I'm very clear on my priorities. I'm very clear that my children are a priority. I'm also
Yep.
very clear that they're not my number one priority. They're teenagers now. I don't need to hold their hands. I don't need to spend every waking minute with them. I can let them explore their own priorities, and I
Yes.
want to make sure that they're a priority. I want to make sure I'm investing enough time with them that the connection is really solid, that they feel accepted and loved.
Exactly.
And I don't need to tell the world, yeah, I'm a family man. I devote 90 hours a week to my kids or whatever. It's not. I'm lying to myself and I'm lying to my world, to the world, and I'm lying to my kids. So getting clear on that is the starting point.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a continuous act of juggling, spinning plates, and so on in life. And yeah, I agree with what you said there, Mike. Be honest with yourself and your surrounding. What's important at the moment, and it will be phases through life. You will have different phases where you have different focus, and that's perfectly fine. And
Yeah.
I think that one
If
of
my
the
priorities, if
yeah,
if my priorities, if I was still living according to my priorities in my 20s
Yeah.
right now, that would be ridiculous. My priorities have completely shifted
Yes.
since then, and so you need to, revisit this work and get clear through these different phases of your life and understand and make this explicit and make it explicit to the people around you and say, hey,
Yeah. Good
to your
point.
partner or to your kids or to your teammate, these are my priorities. I want to explore how you fit into that and how, all these kind of things and have clear conversations about these things because otherwise your priorities are completely hidden to other people and they're left scratching their head. Why did he do that? Or why did he say that? Or, all these
Yes.
kind of things. So,
One thing that traveling has brought to me is understanding of others and also appreciation for what you kind of have. And again, not from a comparison point of view, but you see many different things when you're traveling all over the world. What has been a good insight for you traveling multiple countries and seeing very different worlds?
mhm. I think as of last count, I'm, close to 70 countries
Yeah,
that I've visited. So I've visited, I've experienced so many different interpretations of human life as we talked about before. And I mean, it's cliche to say this, but it's it really is true that um, we don't need much to be content and fulfilled
indeed.
in life. And I've been it, generally what I see is it boils down to connection to the people around you, feeling like you are a web
Yeah,
of something larger than yourself, not just your family, but the larger community you're part of, the larger community, which is, the world, the natural world, maybe some greater consciousness or whatever that may be. And living and understanding that it just boils down to a few simple things. It's really a constant reminder wherever I go, whether it's, the nomads in Mongolia or villagers in Uganda.
yeah,
Uganda is a wonderful example. I've been there many times. Southwestern Uganda in the Virunga Mountains region.
yes,
There's so many people there. It's very rural, but it's also very densely rural. And there's
yeah,
so many people, and they live up in each other's business all the time, for better or worse. But they're really taking care of each other. And there's this wonderful African concept, which you may have heard of, called Ubuntu, and it originated in South Africa, but it's spread throughout Africa. And it's you can boil it down to this idea of I am because we are. And so it's understanding that every human is part of a web of relationships.
yes,
It's part of a larger web of life. And when we live life from that place, it's it's a much richer place to live than this notion of, I'm separate. And I think America is the most extreme manifestation of the opposite. Very much the cult of the individual, very much holding up on a pedestal the idea of the lone hero or the lone heroine who
yeah,
goes against all odds and does it himself or herself. And that's wonderful. It's a wonderful story, but ultimately doesn't make for a rich life. And especially when it hold the billionaires up in a pedestal who live these very lonely lives. Um, Connections with others, again, people who really understand us, who get us, who care for us, who want to look after us, and they want us to look after them. That's what makes life worth living. And it also, virtually every study shows that's what makes life healthier. That's what makes you live longer. Um, you know, when every study that analyzes the factors around well-being and longevity, usually connection is at the very top of the list, or in the top two or three. And
yeah.
so I see that everywhere I go, just how all these other places where those webs and those bonds are much stronger than they are in typical Western societies.
Yeah, I also had the chance to travel to Uganda a few times, and just like you said, you can find people who are way more relaxed and happy about life than you might do on the average street where you live, where people arguably have more more financial stability and so on and so forth. I think the biggest gift you can give to yourself again is try to I'm comparing with myself. I'm competing with myself. So I'm trying to not benchmark what other people are doing, but I at least try to strive for improving myself instead of comparing with everyone else. I mean, I might indirectly do it without thinking about it, but I'm really making a conscious choice to focus more on what I do and what I can influence instead of things that I can't really control and things that are out of reach for myself. How do you deal with the self, similar things? Are you happy to compare with yourself, or are you stuck in benchmarking with others, or where are you at the moment? Self-reflection time.
I think, yeah, I think the benchmarking against others is a tough thing to get out of, right?
Yeah.
Because our entire culture is built around it.
Yes.
And we have all these, means and these platforms that show us, you know, you're always gonna, no matter where you are, you're always gonna see people who are more quote unquote successful, and
Yep.
they have more of this or more of that. Ultimately, I remind myself that these things that I see that I'm tempted to compare myself to, they really aren't they really aren't the things that are going to lead me to a richer, more fulfilling life.
Yes.
And remind myself that what leads to a richer, more fulfilling life is the connections, the people that I have in my life. Do I have people that love me? Do I love, other people? Have I been loved, and am I loving? And that is the ultimate benchmark for me. And also, do I love myself? Right.
Yep.
Um, and that has been, that has been a journey in and of itself, is getting to that place where, like, I really, uh, have a profound sense of my own worth and my own value, and I didn't arrive at that place easily. And that to me is the benchmark. Is, can I be kinder and more compassionate and loving towards myself, tomorrow versus today, and
Yes.
today versus yesterday, and moving on that journey. Um, I, I've tried to. My life was so built around achievement and around goals for so long. And I would sit down at the end of the year every year, and I would, create my big list of goals. And then, the next year hits, it's like, okay, time to start achieving these goals. I still do that to some extent. I like to stretch
Me too.
myself.
Me too.
Um, but it used to be such a singular focus, and it's not so much anymore. It's really just about how am I showing up, how am I showing up day to day for myself, for
Yep.
others? That to me is more important. Um, and it's a tricky balancing act, because I don't think I'm at a place where I could just say, okay, I'm totally content staying where I am for the next 40 years. Because that doesn't, you know, I think I have ADHD, and I think my brain is, needs the dopamine, needs new things, and all that kind of stuff. And
Yep.
I still need that. I'm still trying to be honest and truthful to my wiring, but also recognizing that, get it. The actual achievement itself is going to bring me very little, if anything at all.
Yes.
But it's the journey of who I become along the way of that striving that is more important to me. So I try to be much more intentional with my goals. And, so for instance, if I set a goal of, I want to be more deeply connected with my children, for example, it's a meaningful goal to me. Um, if I at the end of the year feel like my relationship with my children has deepened, and it's become stronger, that is great. The goal achieved. But it's
Yes.
really, I ask myself, who do I have to become along the way in order for those connections to deepen? And that leads to a different set of questions, and it leads to a different set of actions. And whether at the end of the year my connection is stronger or the same or weak or whatever, the journey has taken me somewhere useful. And ultimately, the other things are kind of out of my control, right? I
Yep.
can set a revenue goal for my company, and if I'm just focused on the revenue goal itself without focusing on the journey, then I may hit the goal, and then, yay, mission achieved. 10 minutes later, I'll be like, okay, what's the next goal? Or I may miss the goal, and then I'm devastated. I didn't achieve my goal. But if I'm focused on, if I want to double the size of my company, for instance, and then I have to ask myself, I can't get there with the current set of tools and current set of
Yep.
identities and beliefs. I have to change who I am at a more fundamental level. And is that what I want? Is that the person I want to become? And I think that's going to lead me somewhere, meaningful. It's going to lead to an interesting set of questions and processes, and that's more important to me. And it's certainly more important than benchmarking myself against what somebody else has achieved or whatever. I really try and tune that out, and it's hard, because I'm human.
Yeah, no, I could have said exactly the same things. Like what are you striving for, and can that and maybe your goals help you to get there faster? And who do you need to become, and who do you need to connect with, who can help you maybe to get there faster? So again, this whole self-made thing, everyone who's saying that are not just honest enough to look around them, because so far we don't have that one man band multi-billionaire company. I've heard about one case, not whether it's true or not, but regardless, you are getting there with other people, and it might be his parents or whatever that helped him to get there as well. So you're not self-made. You're orchestrating people around you if you would like to be a leader, to make the best and to make you all grow together into whatever that might be next. So yeah, interesting. So sounds like you've been on a chase for yourself for a better part of your life. How did you find it to work with your passion to the time where your passion became routine? I'm referring to your last company.
Hmm. So in the early days of my last company, the company was based in British Columbia, Canada, in the Canadian Rockies. And in the early days, um, my hat collection was quite large. I was I was the lead guide, I was the
Yeah,
driver, I was the chef, I was the marketing department, I was the sales department, I was the finance department,
yeah,
all those kind of things. And it was quite intense at times, but I was on my mountain bike 80, 90 days a year. I was guiding people throughout these incredible locations around British Columbia and creating these really meaningful experiences for them. And then around year 10, I moved back to Toronto. And I won't get too deeply into the journey. There was a whole emotional, psychological journey that brought me back here. But there was an inflection point where I asked myself, what do I do with this company? Uh, we were running trips throughout British Columbia, and then I'd moved to Toronto. Like, I'm going to keep moving back in the summer. I don't know about that. So that's when I started um, expanding the company around the world. And so
yes,
there was a few years there where that sort of reignited my passion because I love travel,
yep,
and I got to travel with my mountain bike, and I was taking journalists to all these places around the world, and it was super fun. It's like, oh my God, travel plus mountain biking, this is a dream come true.
yes,
Then I had my first kid, and then shortly after that, a couple years later, we had twins, and then it's like, okay, I have to curtail the traveling if I want
yep,
to stay married. I mean, the travel almost went to zero at that point. And so then the focus became, okay, now I'm going to focus on a different adventure, the adventure of growing my company. And we've been growing quite nicely, but I became impatient. So I did the thing, I raised money from investors, did it again a couple more times. I
yes,
took on debt, I grew the team, we expanded, we launched this whole software platform, all these kind of things. And and that was kind of exciting for a bit, but then somewhere along the line, I woke up and I was like, I'm going to spend my whole day looking at spreadsheets, writing shareholder reports, dealing with crises, from my team, and it became very unfun, and the passion was kind of gone. And part
yeah,
of it was that I wasn't doing the things that I was passionate about. Was
yes,
actually being on my bike, and part of it was that I'd outgrown the company, and I hadn't recognized it. So I tried to fill that by choosing new challenges, and all these challenges of growing the company and whatever.
yes,
When really, had I been honest with myself, is that I'd actually outgrown the company, and it was time to exit. And I exited the company probably 5 to 7 years too
mm,
late. And had I had a better set of questions, then had it before I started raising money from investors, for instance, had I asked, it was based on accelerating the growth, and
yes,
had asked the question like, why do you want to grow this company so rapidly? What is driving that? I might have this answer came to me, 5 to 7 years later, and I realized that so much of that was a quest for validation. I wanted
yep,
my entrepreneurial peers to validate me. I wanted magazines to validate me. I wanted, my share, whatever.
Yes.
And realizing that actually the validation I was seeking was the validation I didn't get when I was a child, from my parents, from my
Yep.
teachers, from my peers, whatever. And that was a terrible reason to run a business. It was a terrible reason to scale a business. And then ultimately I was never going to deal with that emotional, void, no matter what I did with my company. And
Yes.
had actually stopped and asked, okay, why are you scaling this company? And why are you raising money from investors, whatever? I could have saved everybody a lot of time and a lot of anguish. And I could have spent, a fraction of that money on therapy instead, and 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 dealt with the core problem rather than trying to use my company and hundreds of different people. And to be fair, we created a lot of magic in the process and impacted a lot of
Yes.
people, but it also was a very deep cost to me and some of the people around me.
So I'm not sure if it's appropriate or not, but do you mind sharing some lesson learned from people who are thinking about selling their business so they can learn from things that worked well or not so well in your process? Again, if it's appropriate.
It's very appropriate. I'm happy to share. Um, I mean, there's it's so many. We could talk about this for another hour if we want, just on this topic, but I'll try to highlight a few. Um, I For me, it was about a 2 year, 1.5 to 2 year process from start to finish. Um, and so I want to highlight a few of the things that could have made my journey a little smoother, a little bit different. Um, I started a I started that process too late. I was so burnt out, and I'd raised a whole bunch of money, and our
Yes.
there was all this cash coming in, and revenue was going like this, but our expenses were going like this.
Yep.
And so the company was growing but losing lots of money,
Yes.
um, which is not a great position to be in when you're going to market. So
Yeah.
I had to sell on this story that, like, and I did make a whole lot of changes to fix the actual business model that it worked better, but because of the lag time between those fixes and how it shows up, I was basically going to market with a story like, hey, look at our revenues. Yeah, there's lots of cash shortfall, but we're dealing with that. Um, I might have actually spent some time working on the business model first. I might have started the process earlier, because most people come to that process when they're burnt out. Like, I got to get out, right? And um, probably better when you feel those first signs of, like, hey, I'm feeling like this company and I are not really aligned. Recognize that and being honest with that. It's like, hey, that's an inflection point. Do I continue, or do I explore? Maybe it's time to get out, right?
Yeah.
That's a better, when you recognize those signs earlier, that's a better time to start. Because as you know, making that decision to sell a company, and when you actually sign the documents,
Yeah.
when you actually get the money, and it can be, that can be 2 years or more.
Indeed.
Not to mention the fact that often you're stuck, you know, in an earnout working for your acquirer for maybe a
Yep.
year or two. I've had friends who've had 3 year earnouts, and it's like, that's a recipe for misery. Um, so that's another one. It's like, understand that the process takes much longer than
Yeah.
you think it will, and that process, it's a full-time job trying to sell a company. I
Yeah.
had to
Exactly.
basically hand off the company to my employees and say, hey, I got to focus on the sale. Just, after I signed a letter of intent, that due diligence process was at least 25, 30 hours a week, just
Yeah. Yeah.
just to deal with that. So you have to understand. People think, okay, I'm going to sell the company. I've made the decision. Wheels are in motion. I'll be done and I'll be exit. Like,
No.
and all these difficult feelings of burnout or whatever and stress. That's all gonna, in the short term, that's all gonna go up,
Yeah.
right? And even when you sign the paperwork and get the money in your account, your journey is not done. There's very few. I mean, I was very fortunate because I had spent a lot of time, and this is maybe a lesson. I'd spent a
Yes.
lot of time before the sale taking myself out of day-to-day operations as
Yeah.
much as
Good point.
possible.
Yes.
So by the time I actually went to market, I was down to about 4 or 5 hours of team meetings a week, and that was it. I was out of the day-to-day.
Yep.
And a lot of that was just by necessity. I was so burnt out, I didn't want to be in the day-to-day. But if you're still working 60, 70 hours a week and you're trying to sell the company, well, an acquirer is looking at that and saying, well, either we need to keep this person on for a long time to keep working their 60, 70 hours, or I'm going to have to do that, or somebody on my team's going to have to do that. And that's going to drive your multiple and your
Yep.
potential down. So put all that stuff in place. Take yourself out of the day. Easier said than done, right? Not an easy journey, but start that process. and understand your numbers and get all your paperwork, get your minute book
Yeah.
and all that stuff ready before you go to market, because otherwise it'll just make the whole process really,
Yeah.
really stressful. And the other thing I would say is, you know, myself and a lot of the entrepreneurs I know that have sold, they get fixated on this number. They have a number in
Yeah.
mind,
Yeah.
and they're so committed to that number, and they have to have that number, and they shoot themselves in the foot in the process. They might get, what's actually a really good offer, but it's not the number, and so then they
Still the
they
best
keep
one to
searching and
do. Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, and often that number is out of proportion to any reality, right?
Yes.
And they think, oh, this is the lifestyle I want to live, and whatever. So I need $10 million for that. If you actually deconstruct the life that you want to live, you probably don't need $10 million. Maybe you'd be fine with a million or 2 million or
Yep.
whatever.
Yep.
And also, like, you know, I don't know too many, especially entrepreneurs. I don't know too many people who've taken a big payday and then they just go, they might go golf or they travel for a bit or whatever, but ultimately they're going to get bored with that. They need fulfillment. They need a purpose for showing up. And so if your number is based on how much money you need to retire and you're, 35, you're not going to sit around for 50 years twiddling your thumbs. You're going to go crazy. So you're going to work, you're going to continue
Exactly.
to pull in income. You probably don't need as much money as you think. And then, my friend Dan Martell, I remember when I was going through my sale and I was talking to him about it and said, and he gave me a really useful sort of heuristic, which is, in any deal, there's the money and then there's the terms.
Yes.
And you have to decide which is more important to you because you're probably not going to get the money you want and the terms you want. You
Yep.
have to be willing to be flexible. And so for me, the terms were much more important. I wanted to be free and clear of the business as quickly as possible. And I was willing to accept less money, um, because of that. It's ultimately it wasn't anywhere near the number I had in mind, but it was
Yep.
a decent number,
Yep.
but I got the terms that I wanted. I was free and clear within 6 weeks. We
Yeah.
signed the agreement. The agreement was, I want to have, I mean, it was actually quite comically small. The commitment is like the new owner, he wanted to have a 90-minute meeting with me every Tuesday for the next 6 months. He was going
Okay.
to keep me on salary and
Yes.
whatnot. Um, Within 6 weeks, he sent me a message and said, "Hey, you know what? We're good. This thing kind of runs itself. We don't need to do these meetings anymore." So
Yes.
6 weeks later, I was completely free and clear, which is what I wanted.
Yeah, I have interviewed many, many people, also had many people who have been helping through this process. And I think your friend's advice at the right time have saved you years of headache and pain. Why? Because you were humble enough to take a different number to get the terms you wanted. Many people flip that. So they are stuck with a number which might not even be close to the current valuation, which means they might, okay, fine, you need to stay with the company for 3, 4, 5 years to hit that magic number, which still not might be the right number for whatever reason, tax or whatever setup. So yeah, the many things have to do this, and to have someone to like you did, to have someone who's done this before, or has at least experience around it, can be super helpful. Same
Yeah,
with,
and if I can add to that part,
please go
if
ahead.
I can add to someone who's done this before, I spent about 6 months trying to shop the company around myself.
Yeah.
Ultimately, got nowhere,
Yes.
and I hired a broker
Yeah.
after 6 months,
Yes.
and we spent the first he spent the first 2 months helping me like really clean up the company, get all my documentation, get everything in order, put
Yep.
together an actual proper professional presentation that
Yes.
included the stuff that people really need, whatever. And then within, once we went to market, within a month we had our letter of intent. And so, the amount that he ended up charging for that was peanuts compared to, he probably saved me a year of banging my head against a wall trying to do it all
Yep.
myself.
Yep. Interesting. I'll leave a question. I would love to speak to that broker later
Yeah.
because it's not unusual because you got brokers that are broker who are broke, and you got brokers or listing agents, so you got a whole range, and you seem to have found a good one. So congrats, because like you said, you saved at least a year and probably a few dollars as well. Great,
Yeah.
perfect. So if you could do, you kind of have hinted about it already, but if you rewind to a few years before you actually did the exit, what would you have done even better? So people who are now thinking about maybe selling in the next 3, 5 years, what can they do today to save themselves headache later?
Yeah. Well,
I've been writing about this and advising all day long, but you have done it relatively recently. So yeah, fire away.
yeah, yeah. Like I said, our revenues were increasing, but our expenses were increasing way
Yes.
more, and our profit and loss statement and our balance sheet looked terrible. Um, and the thing is, when you're bringing on a bunch of money from investors, and comparatively to other businesses, this wasn't a huge amount of money, but it sure felt like a huge amount of money to me.
Yep.
It's like you've got all this money in your bank account, and I was also taking on loans and whatever. And it's like sums of money in my bank account that I never could have imagined.
Yep.
It didn't feel very urgent at that time to really understand my business model, to really understand my numbers.
Good point.
And so like, okay, we've got lots of money. We can just, we don't really need to worry about that so much. So let's, throw a bunch of money at this marketing plan. Let's throw a bunch of money at hiring these people, whatever. And it was only later, and the business was, as you can imagine, quite seasonal. We had some winter trips that we were running that would bring in cash, but it was still,
Yes.
you know, 80% of our revenue was between May and September. And then we'd have these violent cash flow swings. And then I would often left be scrambling in the off season, and cash flow was really stressful, whatnot. And then we got to one off season, and I was staring, you know, in 4 to 5 weeks, we're not going to be able to make payroll.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't think so. Then I went, and I got to the point where it's like, oh, I really don't want to raise money again. I'm sick of this, and I managed to figure out a way to bring in some more money.
Yep.
But then I realized that I needed to take a much deeper look at the numbers. And so, painstakingly going through our profit and loss statement, all of our operating expenses, our cost of goods sold, um, looking at, our margins on, our margins varied. If we take a typical trip and say, 8 people per trip, which was sort of the average, some of our trips we would get 10% margin. Some of them we would get 50 to 60% margin.
Right.
I didn't really understand that at the time. And then, why do you have a business model that is so inconsistent and crazy? And B, why are we spending thousands or tens of thousands of dollars advertising this particular destination where our margins are razor thin? You throw that into the equation, all of a sudden that destination's losing money. Um, and so really didn't understand the business model. And so I ended up having to I went through all of that and ended up having to completely reorient the company. So we ended up cutting our operating expenses by almost 40%.
Yeah.
And so there was an easy 7% there just in software that we were paying for that we either weren't using or we didn't need to use or not enough people were using, to give you an example. Then there was other expenses that we didn't need to pay. Um, I was also building up this crazy software platform. I had 2 full-time software developers that were just burning through cash. And I said, oh, that has to stop. And then it became the tougher decisions. And I had to let, a key person
Yep.
go because the salary just wasn't justified and she wasn't doing great work. So that took care of the operating expenses. Then I started looking into the cost of goods sold, our margins, that kind of stuff. And I had to renegotiate all of my working agreements with all these different operators. And we had all these different operating agreements. And it was really difficult, but I basically said started with the standpoint, we need to get people on one standard operating agreement, and we need our margins to be as consistent as possible. And so it was months and months of tough negotiations with people who were pushing back. And I said, listen, the long-term health of this company really depends on this. Otherwise, there won't be a company. We won't be bringing you any business. And
Exactly.
we need we need to do this. And that was difficult, but it was ultimately, the right thing to do. We also then increased our prices by 25%. And I ran the numbers on that and said, if we raise our prices by 25%, how much business can we afford to lose? Um, and it was actually staggering, when you
Yes.
actually do the numbers. If you raise your prices by 25%, I can't remember what it was, but it was like we can afford to lose 40% of our
Yeah.
customers and still have the same, gross
Bet
profit.
still better
Um,
off. Yeah.
yeah. And then we did that again a few years later, and we gradually occupied this higher end, this unoccupied high end of the mountain bike tour market that nobody else had, and we could serve fewer customers but give them better service, and we would have higher profits. So all these things, that um, eventually address the underlying business model. And by that time we'd addressed everything, and then I went to market with it. But had I given it another year or two, then we would have started to see all the profitability and stuff like that. Mind you, a year after I sold it, COVID hit, so I know that didn't help profitability
Yeah,
for
yeah,
the acquirer. Yeah. But
yeah,
just the lesson that to me is like, before you go to market, really understand your numbers and understand your business model. And if the business model isn't there, then do what needs to happen to fix it. And if you're going into a meeting with an acquirer and you don't know some key numbers in your
yes,
business, and they ask you, and you're like, I don't know, I'm gonna have to look that up and get back to you. Um, some people will be like, okay, this conversation's over, right?
yeah,
If you don't understand what your gross margin is, and you're like, Googling gross margin,
yes,
for instance, they're just gonna laugh you out of the room, and they're gonna get lost. You
yeah.
need to understand the numbers.
Yeah, so again, you pointed out a few things here, like get to know the vocabulary of selling and buying businesses, so you will look more advanced than you might be. Do that more than spring cleaning of costs. I really like that you highlighted those, like get the business model right before you add the growth capital. So the sequencing there, of course, is key. Uh, Sell profitable stuff. And I like that you also raised the price. And I like that you have been very specific here with us, so like 25%, and then again repeating that later to put you into that top tier of the market, and hence also easy to manage the profitability. So all really good business learnings out there. And it all came from the idea of working with your passion, which is something some people said a few years you should work with your passion. I had like cave diving and exploration as one early business idea, and I did work with it, but then decided to just keep it as my hobby and not as my business. I stopped being a diving instructor and guide for others and kept it as a hobby instead. But I've also been doing similar trips like yourself for executives to the mountains and so on. So many
Can
similarities.
I can I Yeah,
Go ahead.
Frederick, can I just say something about that idea of passion?
Yes.
Because that it's common wisdom, um, you know, explore your passion and figure out a way to make a living
Yeah.
from it. I think in some cases that can be great, and some cases that can be terrible advice.
Yeah.
And back, many years ago, I used to run these startup boot camps for entrepreneurs, and they would come to me with these ideas, of these businesses they wanted to start. And right away in week one, I would tell them, throw your idea out the door. The world does not care about your idea. Your customer does not care about your idea. They care about their problem. They have a
Yeah.
problem and they want somebody to solve it.
Yeah.
You have to start, you have to start with the problem. And
Yes.
so I would tell them, I want you to go out and I want you to interview 10 potential customers.
Yes.
You're not going to talk about your solution, your idea at all. You're just going to, if you think your idea can solve a particular problem, get to know that problem really well. So interview people, ask them about the problem, get to know the problem, get to know the person, all these kind of things.
Yep.
Your solution to that problem may become a totally different thing, but you're basing it on real world knowledge and real world experience, from real customers. And
Yep.
so it reminds me of many years ago. I was in Guatemala, and I was doing a scouting trip to Guatemala, and I brought a couple journalists along with me, and that was my standard thing. If I want to explore a new destination, I just bring a few of my journalist friends
Yep.
along, and we'd test it out, and they'd write a nice story about it. And if we ended up going ahead with it, then I'd have some nice publicity, and if we didn't, I'd still get some nice
Yep.
publicity. But we were going up this trail outside of Antigua, and going this steep climb, and we're grunting away for 20 minutes going up this steep climb, and then I come upon this guy on the trail, and he's walking up the trail with a unicycle. And he's got a unicycle with big knobby tires on it, so it's like sort of like an off-road unicycle.
Yeah.
So I stop and I get curious and I ask him, what are you doing? And it turns out he was in Antigua. He was also doing his own scouting, and he
Yeah.
wanted to start offering off-road unicycling trips.
Yeah.
And And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I'm a big fan of niche businesses. I think,
Yeah, niche of
the
a niche.
riches,
Yeah.
the riches are in the niches, as they
Yeah.
say. But I asked him, um, how many other people do you know who do like mountain biking, unicycling? He said, well, there's a couple of buddies and we go out and we ride our local trails. He was from somewhere in the States. I said, okay, well, do you know anybody else who does this? Yeah, like I think there's some clubs around there. Um, and as I explore, it's like we're talking about maybe, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred people, in the United States who are into off-road unicycling. And if you take that, like how many of those people actually have the means and the willingness
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
desire, to go travel around the world? And he had just focused on this idea. He got this idea, I want to make it a business, and he was passionate about it. But he was putting the cart before the horse, and he wasn't actually even exploring whether this was a viable business.
Yes.
And so I think that's an important, our passion needs to meet demand.
Yeah.
Are there enough people demanding this thing that you're so passionate about?
Yeah. So guys out there, you're getting more and more gold dust as we go along here. So many super valuable business learnings that I can testify. It's not only from you. I hear the same from many people, and you read about it, but here you hear it from a person who's a practitioner. So with all of these business learnings, what is Wayfinder and how do you use your past experiences to create the next generation of leaders that are more happy about themselves?
Yeah. So, and what I do in a nutshell is I take high achieving entrepreneurs,
Yep.
I take them to these very wild places around the world, and I help them explore what it might look like to pivot from high achievement, a focus on high achievement, to a focus on high alignment. So
Yes.
living your life as an expression of truth of who you are. Um, I like to say, uh, matching your external world to your inner world. And so getting clear on what your inner world is. And often a lot of the people I work with aren't really very in touch with their inner world, right? Because they're moving all the time, they're hustling,
Yep.
they're grinding, they're moving quickly, and they don't create a lot of space in their in their days or in their lives to really listen to what's going on inside. And so I create an environment for them to do that, both by being in these, wild, different places, but also creating an environment where people can have really deep, honest conversations with their fellow, their fellow founders, their fellow entrepreneurs, and hopefully, as the result of that, after 7 or 8 or 10 days in a place like Bhutan or the Amazon jungle or whatever, arrive at some level of truth and some level of clarity that they didn't have going. And I'm also careful. It's an adventure, and we go to these really amazing places, and we do these really cool adventures and activities, and meet some amazing people. But really, that's just the delivery mechanism, and it's a
Yes.
delivery mechanism for an experience of deep community, for an experience of deep clarity. I'm also careful that I'm not over promising. I'm not a miracle worker. I can't change your life. And some people will, come to my retreat and I'll completely change your life. Um, that's really not what I'm looking to do. I've only got 7 to 9 days to work with people. What I'm ultimately trying to get them to do is understand that there's a deeper journey to be embraced than the one that they're on. And that journey is, I like to call it the soul journey, is what
Yeah.
is my soul asking for me? And that is a question people don't tend to ask until midlife. When you're in your 20s, you're just concerned with it. You're concerned with achievement and
Yeah.
status and wealth and all that kind of thing. But then you get to midlife, and we chatted about this earlier, and these other questions arise. Those are typically the people that go in my events, and I help them ask better questions. I help them, hopefully find some answers. But more importantly, I help them understand that there's a deeper journey to embark on in this second half of life,
Yeah.
and find
No,
some good companions for the journey.
yeah, no, that's really good. I know quite a few people in this space, and many of them are coming from similar military background as myself, so like special forces. So they got the whole leadership, exploration, testing boundaries, uniform team, all of those things. But I like what you add to this mix in addition to that is that you also have the whole founding story, growth, acceleration, raising capital, exiting, and now you have that as well. I see that as very valuable to many people who are also founders because myself as a founder, I often chase like might chase awards, achievements, but I rarely stop to celebrate any of them. It's just like next, next, next. And that is so common in this space that you don't appreciate. I even had like trainings with teams how they should celebrate together. So yeah, how can you get paid to do consulting, how to celebrate success? Well, you can, because it is unheard of in many high performance teams. They don't celebrate together, and you might not
Yeah,
celebrate
and
your
if
own
and
success.
yeah, and if you're not celebrating together, it's hard to motivate people for the next goal. It's like,
Yes.
okay, we just spent the last 6 months killing ourselves to get this thing, and we opened a bottle of champagne,
Yep.
and
Next.
whatever. It's like this next, this feels kind of hollow, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, if we're going to strive for something, let's really celebrate and let's really reward people and let's really appreciate and thank people for
Yeah.
what they've given to this.
Let's put our business brains together. I thought about having a monologue about this, but let's explore it together instead. So many of the big AI companies have been laying off people. So on the face of it might not seem like a big deal. It might be a few hundred, a few thousand, or even a lot more. But then when you take the people, the numbers that are laid off times their salaries, and then you see that saving times the multiple of that business. So many of these, take for example Facebook and many of those, uh, that little firing of a few thousand people is actually creating like shareholder value worth 50 billion plus. So why is the revenue and profit per employee a quite interesting benchmark that many people don't use? Revenue per benchmark. So revenue per employee.
Yeah, interesting question. That is actually a ratio that I tracked in my company
Yeah.
because as it is for most companies, your cost of labor is usually your highest cost, your
Yes.
highest operating cost, right? Um, if you so basically what gets measured gets affected, right? And so
Yes.
if you are the KPIs, the key performance indicators that you track and that you pay attention to, those are going to dictate the decisions that you make in your business. They're going to dictate how you show up in your business.
Indeed.
And there's in any business, there's hundreds of KPIs you can choose from, right? And so from a marketing perspective, right, anybody who's ever logged into a Google Analytics dashboard knows that you could spend an entire day just digging through 100 different analytics to choose from there. Like
Yep.
what do you focus on? And that's sort of a fractal of a company as a whole. And so I actually spent, when I was going deep in terms of exploring my business model, and we had all these dashboards set up, and I realized that a lot of these dashboards were meaningless. That A, there was too much data. B, it was the wrong data to focus
Yep.
on. And C, nobody was really meaningfully paying attention to data because there was too much of it. And so as I started looking at the business model, I asked, what are the the very few metrics that actually dictate the health of the company? And what I realized, you know, if you look at a typical travel experience, any travel company, with any travel experience, I'm just using my company as an
Yep.
example, but with any travel company, when they run a trip, there's a high fixed cost to that.
Yes.
So the guides are going to get paid the same whether there's 3 people or 50 people or 12 people or whatever. They're going to get paid the same. Other expenses,
Yes.
right? So high fixed cost, and then there's a variable cost, per person cost. And so and the customers are generally paying you they're all paying the same money. So then your margins vary widely. So your margin at 3 people might be zero. You might be breaking even. Your margin at 12 people might be 60%. And and I realized that we had far too many trips that were going out with low numbers. And I
Yes.
think before we started tracking this number, our seats sold, and I went back historically, and our seats sold percentage was around 50 to 60%. So
Yep.
the percentage of the total seats that we put out in a given year, what percentage are we actually filling? And that was based on, I was just wildly optimistic every year when we launched our
Yes.
new destinations and I'd be like, oh, the company's going to grow 50%. So let's add 50% more seats. and our marketing wasn't keeping up with my ambition.
Got it.
And so and so percentage of seats sold became our number one metric, and we tracked that over time. And if the number was too low, that meant we had to the solution wasn't more marketing to fill up more seats. That was, we were already doing that. The solution was to get very diligent about how many seats we're actually putting out, and so that it's based on real data, not just wild,
Yeah.
expectations and dreams and whatever. And so if we filled 600 seats last year out of 1,200, well, maybe next, and we're going to grow 30%, so that's 780. Well, then maybe we should have 900 or 1,000 seats next year, and then our percentage is more like 80 or 90%. Our margins go. So that's just an example of actually understanding the metrics that drive the business.
Yes.
And
Good
so
point.
we simplified it down to that. Marketing, sales, everything fed into that. And so then I took every employee had their own big dashboard, and they would report to me on 10, 12
Yep.
different metrics. And I realized I only need one metric. Typically, I can boil it down to one metric. And I will get around to asking your question about the revenue per employee.
Yep.
But I realized for my marketing person, they were doing all sorts of different things, and that's fine. Ultimately, how many qualified leads are you generating every week? Like for my sales person, what percentage of qualified leads are you closing, converting to sales? And so when I simplified that for them, it gave them very clear direction on what to focus on, and narrowed down this possible range of things they could do to a much smaller range, and it made it much easier for them to focus on that. And it made our conversations much easier. They either hit the number, they didn't. I would ask them if they missed it, why did you miss it? And they explain, and then they could take their own initiative. And then coming back to this idea of revenue per employee, again, if this is probably your number one operating cost, you need to be able to make clear connections between your investment in employees and your revenue.
Yes.
And you can when you look at it that way, then you start to understand. Number one, you pay attention to your profit and loss statement, and you look at your operating expenses. Like, whoa, 60% of our operating expenses is labor, and then you either ask yourself, is that the right allocation of resources?
Yep.
And if you say it is, well, do we have the right people, and are they in the right seats? And if 60% of your costs are coming from them, then it probably pays to pay more attention to that.
Yes.
And so for me, it was this ongoing question is, do I have the right people, and are they in the right seats?
Yep.
And there was I've laid off people because, they weren't the right fit, but more common than not, I've moved people around to roles that were a better fit. And then when you put people in the right seats, their productivity goes up, their joy goes up, all this kind of thing. And your numbers, your revenue per employee generally goes up. So the other key metric that we focused on, I realized that people who are happier at work, who feel more connected at work, generally do better work. And so the number that I tracked there was just a survey. It was a simple 2-question survey that automatically gets sent out to every employee every month on a scale of 1 to 10. How satisfied are you, in your role at the company? And then there was an open field where they could, what would make you happier, more satisfied in your role or whatever. And then those answers became the basis of our one-on-one
Yep.
conversations, and we would explore that in greater detail. And I was always cautious to make sure that they understood, like, just because they have a request or they write something in that field doesn't mean I can fulfill it. I can't fulfill everything, but I am going to genuinely listen to it. And sometimes that's all people need,
Yep.
is to be listened to.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the one last thing I'll say that ties into that. You've ever heard of Project Aristotle?
Nope.
It was a Google initiative. I think about a decade ago or something like that. And they wanted to examine. Google has thousands of teams across its workforce, and they wanted to know what factors made for the most productive teams. And they spent 2 years studying hundreds, thousands of teams across Google. And what they came up with in the end, the thing that made teams the most productive was this thing called psychological safety. And psychological safety is simply this idea that I can show up as myself, I can show up with my ideas, I can say the things I want to say, and I won't be punished for it. I won't be excluded, I won't be reprimanded, or whatever. Obviously, you can't just
Yep.
show up and say racist things or misogynist things, but just like bringing your ideas forth and having healthy dissent among the team and whatnot. And what creates psychological safety is a feeling of connection. Like you're connected with your colleagues. You see them as human beings rather than colleagues or rather than roles. And
Yes.
there are actual things you can do, interventions, things you can do in the workplace that increase that sense of connection. And we don't have to go into this too much, but just a simple, you know, in my team meetings with my team, we would have the first half hour of those weeks. It was a 90-minute meeting. The first half hour was just sharing what's going on in our lives and just connecting as human beings. And then we could get into the specifics, but we would connect as human beings, and that would just make the workplace seem like a better place to show up.
Yeah, yeah. On the note of sharing good practice, I was also doing some work with Google more than a decade ago, helping them to train their leaders to become better coaches. As part of that research, I dove very deep into their sales organization, and without breaking any kind of confidentiality or anything, one of their key metrics in the sales organization was how many improvements have they done for every customer. So not like how much did you upsell, but like the key metric was like how have you made basically the interaction or even the service delivery better for your customer. I think that's really interesting. I have a few more other reflections on this masterclass you've shared. So think about the percentage of seats sold, like Mike mentioned there before. So you might have an actual physical constraint, but many of you are also in the space of you have unlimited seats, but how can you make them still feel more exclusive so you can be having like a not fake number of seats that you sell so it doesn't feel strange to the other one. I had many more things, but I'll park it there and jump into the the thesis of this podcast is invest in you. What does the statement invest in yourself mean to you?
Mm-hmm. I look at this notion of me, or you, as you would say it, as a very multifaceted being, and at the center of, I look at I use this metaphor of an onion. Onions have multiple
Yep.
layers, and you peel, and at the center of this onion is something very pure and true. This core true self version of me, my soul, if you want to use that language. And layered over top of that is this gigantic onion. All of these ideas of who I am and how I am and whatever that have been accumulated over the years, and that tell me that they tell my psyche, on a deep level, how I should show up in the world, how I should act in this situation, how I should express in the world, how I should not express myself in the
Yep.
world. And the more I live my life according to that onion and all that programming, the more friction I feel. I'm not showing up as a real true version of myself. And so investing in me is doing the work, doing the practices that are going to keep peeling these layers. I will never get to the center of the onion. I know that. There's too many layers. There's too much programming, but that doesn't mean I can't continue to peel layers. And the more I peel those layers, the better version of me shows up in the world. And so right now, one of these layers that I'm really, really working through, and I'm thankful to the universe for delivering me these very hard lessons, particularly over the last few months. There've been some significant challenges, and at one point in my life, I might have approached these challenges from a perspective of, oh, this is terrible. Why is this happening? This is awful. And now I've gotten to the point where I've been through this cycle enough times to recognize that there's some sort of lesson being offered to me here. There's some sort of gift within all of this.
Yep.
And so I approach it from a perspective of what is my lesson to be learned here? And so right now at this season of my life, it took me a while when the challenges started coming. It took me a while to draw the line between that and this idea of my self-worth. And right now I'm in this season of really exploring this idea of self-worth and value, and exploring all the experiences that have compromised, my idea of my self-worth and my value. And the more
Yep.
I peel that away, the more sense of calm I have, the more understanding I have of my worth and my value to myself, to the people around me, to the world. whatever. And so that it's and I will, it's been difficult work. I've had to go into some difficult places as a result. And some days it's like, it's grindingly difficult. But I understand the value of this. And to me, that is the way I invest in me, is to
Yes.
understand that true me at the core, and understand and undo some of the programming so that I can operate from a truer operating system. That's
Yeah.
that's what investing in me means. And it means for the people around me, I show up as a much better version of myself.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. So I can imagine also this makes your relationship with your children even better than before when you understand yourself on a different level, so to speak. So I'm happy for your relationship with them, regardless if I don't know how strong that is. I can imagine it's good. So people who can really relate to what you're saying here, and we have many people who are very much in your sweet spot in terms of people you like to work with. How can people follow your work or connect with yourself in the best way?
Yeah, thank you. My the Wayfinders website is way-finders.com, so way-finders.com. Um, our upcoming events are up there. We just launched our 2027 adventures, going back to Patagonia. I have a spectacular adventure in this area called the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in Colombia. Really
Yeah.
beautiful area with some of the most intact indigenous cultures on Earth. And we also just launched, I'm calling them our immersion. So they're much shorter, 4 day, 3 night versions of what we do internationally. And I'm working with an incredible co-facilitator on our first one in September. And and I also offer these free monthly sessions called the Council, and it's basically an opportunity to connect with other entrepreneurs from around the world, and we explore some of these deeper themes together. So those are a few ways people can take part.
I like it. That's great. Cool. So people all over the world, you've been listening to us for around an hour and change. Hope that you got some both like insights to your own mind in terms of how you can grow yourself by becoming the person you deserve to be, and how you can peel those layers back. And also, you found a way how we can connect with Mike as well and follow his work. And yeah, the list goes on. The episode keeps giving. So yeah, and I really recommend to listen if you're about to sell your business. Listen into just that little section that we spoke about how he did both the smallish mistakes and the even better if, because they are really aligned with what I talk to business owners about as well. So they are not only from Mike, it's a across the board of people who've been trying this before. So it's tried and tested. So I would love to hear your thoughts, closing thoughts for entrepreneurs, people, not entrepreneurs, all over the world, whatever it might be. Invest in your thoughts from Mike.
Yeah. Some closing thoughts. Um, I think I've talked a lot about this idea of doing the inner work and getting to know yourself, and that can often be quite difficult. And I also want to make sure um, that we balance that out, because doing that work can be quite heavy, and if you're whether you're working with a therapist or doing it on your own or working with a coach or whatever. um, but also there's this other side of life, which is joy and pleasure, and particularly now the world seems more chaotic than ever. um, and it seems difficult and dark, whatever, and it can feel like, oh, there's no place for joy in this world. There's serious work to be done, both within me or out in the world and whatever. But joy is such a beautiful, meaningful thing to do and to express in the world, and we have to remember that as well. And so my events in particular, we do some deep work, and there's often lots of tears, stuff like that. We also create lots of space for joy. And there's often tons of laughter. There's often tons of dancing, and making sure that we find that balance. And and expressing that joy is a perfectly valid and beautiful way to meet the challenges of the world, to meet the challenges of the people around you, to meet your own challenges. Um, and not ignoring the dark things, but also bringing joy. And when you express joy, you also give license to others to express theirs. And as Oscar Wilde said, life is too important to be taken seriously.
Exactly. So a smile is for free and a smile is contagious. Until next time, all the best.